A huge Bam Adebayo block sealed another clutch win for the Heat. Miami shot 5 of 9 in the fourth quarter from three-point range, getting the scoring they needed on a night when Jimmy Butler couldn't do it all, and everyone had to find a way to contribute. Has Miami figured it out? Should Kyle Lowry be starting? We break it all down in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, however you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Goldberg here with David Ramil, recording from Miami-Dade Arena following the Miami Heat's big win over the Utah Jazz. And it has been a rough couple of weeks for the Miami Heat, for Tyler Herro, and for Bam Adebayo specifically. But when the Heat needed Bam and Tyler the most, they stepped up and made the most important shot and block of Monday night's 119-115 win over the Utah Jazz. Tyler Herro with a huge three-pointer with 55 seconds left to take the lead. Then Bam coming in for an incredible block with 7 seconds left to preserve that lead. Jimmy Butler was great as usual, 24 points, 8 rebounds, 4 assists, 4 steals, a new haircut. So it was Jimmy carrying the Heat, Tyler and Bam finishing things off. And David, at the risk of sounding like a broken record here, maybe starting to see a shape of what success looks like for the Heat?
It's a possibility, and I know that I don't want to seem like I'm being overly negative here, but I also think that the Miami Heat got extremely lucky, and a lot of tonight's victory was actually more of a mirage than anything else. 10 free throw attempts in the fourth quarter compared to just 2 for the Utah Jazz. They got the scoring they needed, and they got the defensive play from Bam Adebayo late in the fourth quarter, but most of the game was a very sloppy affair against a team that had been on the road for 2 weeks, was on their 6th road game of this 2-week road trip for themselves. So they were exhausted, looking forward to getting back to Utah, and yet Miami only found a way to escape with a 4-point win. I know every game has been in the mud, as Eric Spoelstra likes to say, and I know every game is important. Every win is important, regardless of the circumstances under which those are achieved. But I've got to say, I don't know that they figured anything out other than, you know what? We got very, very lucky tonight, and we took advantage of some opportunities when they came our way, and they got the win that they needed. But other than that, nothing really tangible that I think they could continue to build off of.
I'm going to disagree with you on that a little bit, but before I do, the Heat, the biggest problem for the game tonight was the second quarter, where they lost to the Jazz 31-23 in that second quarter. Utah went on that huge run, ended up building an 8-point lead, and you're like, what is going on here? Because the Heat led that first quarter 33-26, and that was even after the Jazz made a little mini run at the end of the first quarter, and you're like, all right, like whatever. And then it all kind of fell apart when the bench was in that second quarter. Spo shortens the bench in the second half. Yep. No Max Strus at all in that second half, and it wasn't necessarily Max Strus's fault, but he was going with a 10-man rotation in the first half, shortens it to 9 guys in the second half. You mentioned Kyle Lowry earlier, big contributions from him, specifically at the start of the fourth quarter. We'll get to that later on when we get to our listener questions, but they won 3 out of the 4 quarters, but that second quarter was just really ugly, and that ended up putting them in such a bad hole early on that they basically had to spend the rest of the game climbing out of. And then for the most part, that fourth quarter was really back and forth. There was a ton of lead changes, 18 lead changes in the game. The Heat, they led by as many as 12, so they had a bigger lead in this game than the Jazz did. But to your point, too, the Jazz aren't very good. Ever since the trade deadline, when they moved all their guys, or a bunch of their key contributors, they've been playing uninspired kind of 500 basketball. They've been on the road for 2 straight weeks. This was their last game of a trip. Usually teams come out flat, and the Jazz, I can't say they didn't come out flat outside of Lowry Markkanen and apparently Simone Fontecchio. Markkanen at 38, Fontecchio at 23. So
a career high. How many career highs have Miami allowed this season? Because it feels like at least a dozen. A player comes in and either scores a career high total or it gets a career high in number of 3-point attempts. Fontecchio, a fine player, but nowhere near. Like, again, a career high of 18 coming to tonight's game. He finished with, 20 points?
23.
So, yeah, he eclipsed that by a pretty wide margin. Look,
5 of 11 on threes.
They gave up a lot of three-pointers. And this is my point. I thought the energy was great in the first quarter. And I texted you specifically.
Yeah.
I said, you know what? This looks like the team has responded to Jimmy Butler's walking off the court late against the Orlando Magic in that overtime loss there. We wondered in yesterday's episode whether or not that was a message being sent to the team. They responded early on in the first quarter. Then that second team comes out there and just absolutely falls apart. Really bad passing, terrible shot making. It was unbelievably ugly to watch, totally sloppy after a strong first quarter. And like you said earlier, they had to climb their way out of it for the rest of the game. It takes out so much momentum. You can't keep building off of that, even just not in terms of like a whole season, but in that kind of context. But over the course of 48 minutes, you get a big lead, you kind of let it slip away, and you play really badly, and then you have to kind of find your rhythm again.
It's frustrating, and it's the 50th clutch game the Heat have played this year, which is, I think, our friend Cooper Moorhead from MiamiHeat.com told us that the record is like 58 or 59.
Yeah, 58, yeah.
First 58 in a season. So the Heat, at this pace, they're going to break that record. They're going to own that record. But
Possibly.
I would bet on it at this point. It's probably like minus 120 odds or something like that at this point. In terms of takeaways of what I think that they can build off of, a couple of things that I liked was them getting back to Tyler Herro and Bam Adebayo in that pick and roll. It was something that the Heat have gotten away from in recent weeks, and I think they got back to it. A lot of this game was Jimmy Butler isolations. A lot of this game, basically every time he was on the court. But at like kind of halfway through that fourth quarter, the Heat, Spo uses this word intentional a lot, and I always kind of wonder, like, why does he keep saying this? Why does he keep why is it so hard to be intentional? Just run your set. Like, why is this so difficult? Just run high pick and roll. Everybody else does it. Right. Why can't you do it? And I still don't know the answer to why they can't do it more consistently, but I did see them get to it more, and they got a lot of good looks out of it. It didn't always result in Bam or even Tyler taking the shot out of it, but in terms of just a base of their offense and a trigger to get into other stuff, I thought they did that. I thought they did it really well, and I thought the Jazz actually did a pretty decent job fighting against the pick and roll, but the Heat still got a lot of the matchups they wanted, and they got to a lot of the looks that they wanted to get to out of it. So I thought that they could build off of that, and I think that's going to be huge, because if you can now pair what it is that Jimmy Butler is doing with some sort of reinvigorated Bam and Tyler Herro pick and roll stuff in that two-man game, those are your two offenses throughout the game. With Spo staggering Bam and Jimmy as much as he is, those could just be your two offenses. And for Miami, the biggest problem for the season for them, for most of the season at least, has been their offense.
Yeah, that's fair. Look, and yet, despite all that, Bam only finished 5 of 10, Tyler 5 of 16. So you can run the pick and roll to death in key situations, or to supplement or complement what Jimmy Butler is capable of doing. And yet that might not nearly be enough if you're only getting a total of 30.
You seem pretty down on the starters, even though they were all positive plus minus, and it was really the bench.
No. I think they made their mistakes, and you're absolutely right. I'm down on what they were able to do over the course of the 48 minutes. They were fine. They did enough, and it's still not necessarily good enough to escape again against a pretty poor Utah team that was tired to get away with just a 4-point win. Fairly inexcusable. And I know there's a lot of angst amongst the Heat fans, and I've tried to be as optimistic as possible. And yet when I saw the bad passing, the sloppy play, players that weren't engaged during their limited opportunities.
So much more positive than this. This
not
is like
tonight.
Off brand for you.
Not tonight. But you know what?
I could see what you're saying. Like they forced 18 turnovers, scored 21 points off those turnovers. They shot 41%.
I just want a goddamn blowout win, Wes. I just want a blowout win.
You're not gonna get it.
They
don't exist anymore for the Heat.
Because they keep crapping themselves in terms of what they're able to do. Like there's that second quarter, and Victor Oladipo has his 3-point shot down. He falls in love with it, and yet he can't get a goddamn entry pass into the low post to save his life. And I don't know why. But you know what? We'll talk about the key players that did step up in the next segment, and whether or not Kyle Lowry should be starting in the last segment. But before we do that, just want to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by Ibotta. We're always throwing away money at something. Groceries, school supply, heat tickets. It's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. Enter Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy. My wife has been on the bandwagon for this. She loves it. She's so obsessed about getting her receipts and making sure she scans them, but she's been getting her money back, and she loves that even more. The average Ibotta user earns $120 a year in real cash back. I'm not sure where she's at, but she's probably close to that. They could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, not in Miami. Or you could use your cash back to buy that flight you've been eyeing, that game that you've been dying to go to, not a Heat game, or the fancy dinner you've been craving. A typical basket of groceries was over $50 more expensive at the end of 2022 than the beginning of the year. Yes, it was. Due to inflation, you could earn 2.5 times that in a cash back from Ibotta, or even more depending on how much you use Ibotta. It gives you real cash back, not points. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta, including Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKED.
Locked on Heat is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, so please do subscribe. Well, it's a Heat win, which means it's time to get in the kitchen and whip up some credit cookies, David. What kind of cookies are we whipping up tonight?
These got whipped up months ago. Really stale vanilla wafers. I was trying to think of the most boring ass.
I like a vanilla wafer. You don't like a vanilla wafer?
I mean, it's okay. I guess they're used as part of a.
Do you prefer a different kind of wafer?
No, I don't
like
know.
Chocolate or strawberry?
I don't know that I've really. Again, I'm not really much of a cookie guy, much to the consternation of our listener base. But I think vanilla wafers. I think of my grandmother chewing on those when she was in her 90s. So I don't know about taste. You. Isn't that just what a lady finger is? Isn't it like a part of
No, it's
wafer?
Very different. Very, very different. Lady fingers go in like tiramisu or something like that.
Whoa,
There's no cream in the middle. A wafer is a wafer. A lady finger's a finger.
Whoa, all right. I didn't realize.
Very, very different.
This is a point of contention.
So we've got 10
boring ass vanilla wafers.
Stale vanilla wafers. Okay, so let's start with Jimmy.
Yeah, let's start with
he's been on such a scoring tear. This was not huge, 38 points against the Orlando Magic, but it was 24 points, and the Heat needed every single one of them. I thought it was a big night. I thought it was a big night for Jimmy Butler. I thought he imposed his will. I was shocked to see how much isolation stuff that they ran for him. It wasn't always pretty. It didn't always work. In the fourth quarter, he missed probably I counted 3 shots basically at the basket or near it that he usually makes. But considering all that he's done recently, and considering all that he did tonight, he's the first guy that I think deserves some stale vanilla wafers.
He was 1 of 3 in the fourth quarter, 5 of 14 overall, 13 of 15 from the line. He got 2 free throw attempts in the fourth quarter, so he got 13 prior to that. Look,
he missed those 2 at the end too.
It's hard to take anything away from Jimmy's overall. Oh, sorry, 2 of 4 from the free throw line. I misspoke. It's hard to take anything away when he is the ultimate producer the way he was today. And again, considering how strong his performance have been as of late. But I still think there was something slightly underwhelming there, and relying upon the free throw line to help bolster what was a pretty weak offensive performance from him. I know he'll say that, that he earns those trips to the line. He plays his bully ball, as he spoke after the game, and said he wants to continue to play that way. I think he got a lot of bailout calls, and I think he took advantage of those, which is absolutely fine. That's part of the game. That's what you have to do in order to find a way to produce. Overall, I think it was a little lackluster performance, but just strong enough, however, to make him the best player on what was an overall mediocre performance for Miami.
He had 1 more point than Fontecchio. Whatever. Fontecchio. He had 1 more point than Fontecchio did.
Simone Fontecchio.
Look, I hear everything that you're saying, but defensively, he was a menace.
Yes.
4 steals.
That's fair.
4 steals, I think, were all in the first quarter, by the way. And there was just moments in that game early where he was like, there was a bunch of offensive rebounds for the Jazz earlier in the game, and there was one point where he was just like, screw this. It was like they got 2 offensive rebounds in 1 possession, the Jazz did, and Jimmy just went and grabbed the ball from, I think, Taylor Horton-Tucker and was like, I'm sick of all this. Just give me the ball. Yes. And then he went down and scored the other end. And that was really how Miami won this game. When you look at how they won this game, they took 79 shot attempts. The Jazz took 90. Yes. The reason the Heat won is because they scored 21 points off of turnovers and went 31 of 36 from the free throw line, where the Jazz went 13 of 18. Jimmy Butler is the starter there in terms of the turnovers, and he's the leader there in terms of the free throw attempts. He went 13 of 15 from the free throw line. He made as many free throws as the Jazz did as a team.
Yeah.
And so was it pretty? No, it wasn't pretty. Was it Jimmy Butler's best game? No. Did he miss some shots there and a free throws late. Am I going to keep asking myself questions and answering them? No, I'm going to stop doing that right now. But I did think he did what he had to do tonight.
That's fair. That's fair. He's got to do something because nobody else does. And I'm not even besmirching Jimmy's overall performance, because I'd be pretty fed up too if I was carrying the team the way that he has over the last couple of games and with nothing to show for it other than a handful of wins, maybe not even a handful of wins. So I know that in the first quarter he played fantastic. He looked like he was trying to get everybody going, actively seeking Kevin Love, Bam, Gabe Vincent, etc., passing up a number of open looks at the rim. That's just what Jimmy does. And then hoping to get those guys going. And then again, for them to blow it in the second quarter so completely and wind up losing that big lead, he was frustrated and should have been. And go ahead.
So frustrated that he didn't wear his shirt to the post-game press conference
and let his hair out.
And
let his hair out at halftime. He went on halftime. He's like,
so I thought it was weird. So look, I'm never going to pretend to know what Jimmy Butler is doing intentionally or unintentionally in terms of his overall aesthetic.
Impossible to predict.
It's impossible to predict. But when he came out with the two loose
yes.
antenna things, I was like, this feels like that wasn't this doesn't feel like the look that he's going for. Either this is something on the way to something else, he's letting the braids out a little bit, something was happening, but I know that wasn't the finished product. I did not know that we get to the finished product or something resembling a finished product by the end of the game. It was like he was like a chia pet, like the hair just kept growing and growing and growing.
It was wonderful.
And getting looser and looser and looser. I liked it.
It was wonderful.
And then showing up in the post-game press conference complete without a shirt. I mentioned this to Ethan Skolnick as we were walking out of the media press conference. He's like 10% left before hitting like peak Tom Hanks in Castaway at this point, because he's just so over it. He's like Jimmy Butler, cast away on a mediocre Miami Heat basketball team, just doing whatever he can and going slightly crazy.
It's possible. I know he didn't want to do media at all. He was kind of pissed off in the locker room, and then eventually he did go out into the podium and spoke to reporters. But I think it's kind of hilarious.
So how many credit cookies, credit wafers, vanilla wafers?
3?
I'm gonna break the time going 4 there. Sorry. We're gonna go 4. If we need to get to 3, we'll bring it down to 3 if we have to. Who's next? We could talk about Tyler, Gabe, Bam, all of them. I mean, we got 2 guys off the bench with double digits.
Bam's big performance, and he again similarly. I think
16 and 9.
I think it was solid production. The final stat line shows that. There were, however, moments where he was refusing to challenge Walker Kessler. He gave up on a couple of plays. He got bodied up once by Chris Dunn, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? Bam. I thought the days of being guarded by Smalls and not being able to, get into the paint were over, and yet that was clearly not the case. And shout out Chris Dunn for working his way back to the league and earning a position with the Utah Jazz.
It is cool.
But I think overall it was a decent performance from Bam Adebayo.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't his best game.
But he came up with a big play at the end there, and I think that helped seal Miami's victory.
It was his only block in the game.
Including the 2 free throws at the end as well.
And that's why he gets, I think, a credit cookie for this, is because when you come up with the game-winning plays in a close game, that deserves credit. I don't really care about your stat line before that. That block was Defensive Player of the Year caliber, highlight reel. That's the kind of block that was. I just want to describe the level of difficulty on that block. And for those who don't recall what we're talking about there, Ochai Agbaji, the Jazz rookie, wide open layup. Just like Moses parting the seas, wide open layup going to the basket. I'm like, oh, there it goes. Like the Jazz are going to tie the game because Tyler's 3-pointer put the Heat back up by 2 a couple possessions before that. And Bam Adebayo, look, it wasn't quite reaching up to block Jason Tatum in the conference finals, because when he did that, he was further away and he came out from under the rim from the other side of it. And the degree of difficulty of that was like a 20 out of 10. This wasn't that. But I'm talking about it for a reason, right? It was coming up from the other side to meet Agbaji in the middle of the air, and then Agbaji tries to kind of do the swooping layup with his right hand and kind of get it around and over Bam and behind him, and Bam just tracks it the entire time and gets an index finger on it. It was just a remarkable play. And then Spo pointing out after the game, for him to do that while also minding the gap between him and Kelly Olynyk behind him.
Was it Olynyk?
Kessler. I'm sorry, it was Kessler behind him. That's really hard. And maybe that's a little bit on Agbaji. You're not seeing the dump off. Maybe he was even trying to get it the dump off and wasn't going. I don't know. But Bam played that perfectly. That is such a high degree of difficulty. So he gets a credit cookie for that. Tyler Herro gets a credit cookie for making that big 3-pointer at the end. He was 6 of 9. Oh, I'm sorry, that's Gabe Vincent. He was 5 of 16 overall, 2 of 10 from 3-point range, 1 of 9 before he took that 3-pointer to give the Heat the lead. The cojones for Tyler Herro to take and make that shot. Spo talked about that at the end too. He's like, he's just a gamer. That's what he does. He doesn't care. And I appreciate that. I think every team needs a guy like that. Sometimes they can shoot you out of games. Tonight, Tyler Herro won them the game with that one.
2 turnovers for Tyler. Look, I'm not just pointing out negative things here. The turnovers suck. I think the big shot is fine. I also didn't like some of the way he executed some sets there, kind of over dribbling out on the perimeter, not taking advantage of nearly enough opportunities. Spo said, look, he took 10 tonight. I'd like him to take more about 3 or 4 more three-pointers. And that's what I'm pointing out there. Look, he only finished 20% from three-point range, so not great overall. 2 of 10, and maybe he shouldn't have shot 4 more three-point attempts. But I think what it speaks to is he had these opportunities, these open looks on the perimeter, and instead he just kind of pounds the ball a little bit more.
He dribbles himself into trouble a little too often. And that was something that
it lets the defense collapse on him and figure it out. He's like, oh, okay, he's going to be out on the perimeter. They can close out on him. And then that winds up becoming a busted play.
And he doesn't dribble his way into open shots. And there's not like a pitch and catch thing like when Steph and Draymond kind of go back and forth and then Steph ends up getting open. Like he just sort of dribbles into a mid-range shot that's contested or a worse three-pointer or something like that. So it's not always great. It's something that he's working to exercise out of his game. Last year it was really bad. The year before that it was even worse. This year it still exists, but it's not as bad. And so I think as the years go on, that's definitely something. And look, it's worth pointing out for sure.
2 cookies for Gabe Vincent.
Yeah, 18 points on 6 of 9 shooting, 4 of 6 from 3-point range.
Huge
made
in the
2
first
three-pointers. Yeah, came out of the gate with 2 made 3-pointers in the first 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think he did a pretty good job of Taylor Horton-Tucker, too, who had been playing well as of late, had been having some strong performances, and Gabe really rose up to the challenge defensively. He did a really, really good job. He spoke in the locker room afterwards of finding the balance about whether or not he's starting or coming off the bench. I'm not sure whether or not he's going to continue to hold on to that starting job, but at least for tonight, he was flourishing in his role as a starter.
1 cookie to Victor Oladipo, who goes 3 of 4 from 3-point range and 11 points. And then another cookie to Kyle Lowry, 4 of 7 off the bench, 10 points. 10 points overall. Did have an assist, had a couple of rebounds. Huge in the fourth quarter. To your point, we're going to talk about that here next. And one big reason why Kyle Lowry, maybe he should continue to come off the bench. We'll tell you what that reason is next. But first, David, tell listeners about our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here. Now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores to the number of threes drained, whether or not Kyle Lowry could continue to come off the bench. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA.
Locked On Heat is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can reach Locked On Heat on Twitter, Instagram, and email us lockedonheat@gmail.com. And you can, of course, reach us and send in questions for our post-game show using the hashtag AskLOHeat. Let's get to this question it's a joint question because we got 2 different questions, and I think they're both worth tackling together. They come from KJK and EJ Brooksy. KJK writes in, Kyle Lowry's roll off the bench works well for the team. Do you agree? EJ Brooksy writes in, is it time to put Kyle Lowry back in the starting lineup for the home stretch? Wow. So people see that Kyle Lowry is working, coming off the bench, huge fourth quarter minutes that we'll get to here in a second. They say, well, maybe you continue this because it's working so well. And then others say, well, it's working. Kyle Lowry's coming back. He seems to be playing better, a little bit more fresh. Maybe it's time to give him back his starting job. Let's talk, though, first, before we answer this question, about those huge fourth quarter minutes from Kyle Lowry. What did you like?
I thought it was fantastic. Played some really solid defense overall. Hit 2 of 3 3-point attempts on a night when they were desperately needing every little bit of scoring in order to help close that gap with Utah. I think he played incredible minutes. Jimmy spoke about it. Eric Spoelstra spoke about it after the game. Love what he does, whether it's coming off the bench or whether or not he's a starter. And I thought he played great. I think he has that energy now because he's missed so much time, because he has healed back. Spo, when I asked him about it, said Kyle is in great shape. He's healthy, no concerns there. And it showed tonight because he had more energy tonight when everybody needed to step up, and he certainly found a way to do so in the fourth quarter. So I think it was a big overall game from him.
Kyle Lowry forced a turnover on an inbound that was just such a crazy smart play. just like grabs the ball and just deflects it off of a Jazz player, and the ball bounces out of bounds off the Jazz player. So that becomes a Heat ball. That was just a smart, like just only a Kyle Lowry play. Like Gabe Vincent, as much as he was great tonight, he's not making that play.
Right.
There's a lot of players in the NBA that are not making that play. After that, a little bit later, he drains a three to give the Heat a quick lead. And then another three-pointer, like you mentioned, to take another 2-point lead with 8.5 minutes to go. He also found Victor Oladipo twice, one for a three-pointer and then one beautiful Victor Oladipo cut baseline, and then Oladipo with the perfect pass to find him to give him the easy shot. That resulted in an 8-2 run for the Miami Heat that kind of swung the game. It didn't win them the game. That was Tyler and Bam later on, because it was still pretty back and forth.
Right.
But that was as huge as anything else that happened in the game, that 8-2 run. That was powered by Kyle Lowry. He was the guy that pushed that. So he was enormous. In terms of whether or not he should start or continue to come off the bench, I really like this bench role. Or let me rephrase that. I like the fact that Kyle Lowry is able to anchor that second unit. Now, whether you get to that as Kyle Lowry as a starter, or you stagger your minutes and rotations and you end up with it at the start, the second and the fourth quarters, I really, really like it, because it gives that second unit an identity. It's Kyle Lowry, Victor Oladipo. It was Max Strus in the first half. It was Caleb Martin in the second half with Omer Yurtseven. Yeah. I really just like that look for the Heat. And with Kyle Lowry in the middle of that, it gives them that adult in the room, a veteran presence. And the one thing I always say about Kyle Lowry is the shot is on and off, and this is certainly not Kyle Lowry's most productive season by a large margin, okay? He has not overall been very good this season, but you cannot deny that when Kyle Lowry is in the game, you feel Kyle Lowry's presence, right? Like, he impacts the game in a very specific kind of way, and I think that kind of identity is something that the Miami Heat second unit has been missing for most of the year.
Yeah, he is the team's only point guard. I don't think that's, Gabe Vincent is sized like a point guard. That does not necessarily make him that. He does not manage the game the same degree as Kyle does, and he's very effective at it. So we're kind of hung up on whether or not he starts or finishes. Today, he didn't do either. I don't know what his role is going to be moving forward. I don't know that anybody does at this point. Kind of, Spo, again, when I asked about it, said it was very fluid. Kind of just go out there and get a feel for what it takes. He played 30-something minutes against the Orlando Magic in his first game back. Then he winds up playing almost 20 tonight. But they were productive minutes, and that's what matters most. It's whether you're getting that production. But I do like that idea that you're putting out there. He does need to be the guy who manages the game, because I don't want the ball necessarily in either Tyler's or Victor's hands, because there was just too many bad passes there, and it's not necessarily working. But if you have somebody like Kyle who's managing the game and orchestrating the offense the way it needs to be run, it's much more effective. So right now, if I had to guess, I'd say he continues to come off the bench.
I'm with you. And when you asked Spo that, I don't know if this was a slip on his part or something, but he did say, it was like, we'll see in a couple of weeks. And I was like, does that mean he's coming off the bench for a couple of weeks? Probably not. I don't know that everything is that literal, but my guess is that Lowry is going to keep coming off the bench. I think that's
would it be a wrinkle for the playoffs, though, that he changes maybe to the starting lineup?
I think that's what we're looking at. I think that's when you talk to Spo and you talk to the players, there seems to be a bigger picture in mind that they keep referring to without being very specific. And I think the bigger picture is, hey, Kyle Lowry was not healthy for the playoffs last year. And even though he's not been productive the way that we needed him to be productive this season, that's over. Sunk cost. Like that's history at this point. We need him to be healthy for these playoffs, because he was not healthy for last year's playoffs, and that hurt us. So I think that's the big picture that they keep referring to, is just keep bringing him off the bench, come out on that second unit, 20 to 24 minutes a night, something in that realm. And then by the playoffs, maybe we see him back in as a starter. Or not. I don't know. I think it could be a little open-ended, but that's probably what I would guess right now, is that Lowry's going to continue coming off the bench for quite a while. That'll do it for us today. Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes of Locked On Heat on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Ring the bell to get notified as soon as new episodes go up. Now make your second listen game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. It's available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. David, enjoy some stale vanilla wafers for me.
I'll be getting those at Tootsie's.